The first time Julian asked me to prove my loyalty, I thought he was joking. "Give one of your kidneys to my mother," he said, almost casually, as if asking me to bring him a cup of coffee. My stomach sank, my mind raced, and yet something inside me stirred, a part that wanted to belong, to finally have a family who needed me. 4 days later, I would discover just how much that simple choice would cost me. But for now, let me take you back to the beginning. I was only 9 years old when my parents died. Interstate 75 near Atlanta. A semi-truck slammed into our car at full speed. My father didn't have time to swerve. My mother, sitting beside him, took the brunt of the impact. One moment, my life was filled with laughter, chocolate-scented hands, and Sunday morning games. The next, it was silence. Hallways in foster homes, iron cots lined up in rows, staff who never remembered my name, and the constant, gnawing sense that I was disposable. I grew up fast, learning the language of survival. No one was coming to save me. No one cared where I went or if I went at all. By the time I aged out of the system, I had learned one truth: if you wanted something, you had to take it. I went to community college, not out of passion, but because the accounting program offered housing support. Even then, life wasn't easy. Employers looked at my foster care history on applications and smiled politely, promising to call back. They never did. I eventually moved to Atlanta, working as a consultant in a boutique in Buckhead. The pay was small, the work repetitive, but I got to surround myself with beauty. Silk scarves, hand-painted pashminas, delicate perfumes. I imagined one day the world would notice me. One day my luck would change. Then Julian Bain walked into my life. Tall, confident, and effortlessly wealthy, he came to the boutique searching for his mother's birthday gift. He lingered, not just on the scarves, but on me, holding my gaze longer than etiquette required. "Do you always speak to customers so calmly?" he asked, his voice curious, attentive. I smiled, unsure what to say. "I try not to flatter, and I try not to look down," I replied. "I try to treat people as they deserve." He returned the next day, then again. Each visit felt like a test I didn't know I was taking. He spoke of trivial things, lingered near me as I organized displays, and slowly, insidiously, I began to trust him. A month later, he asked me to dinner at a restaurant I had only ever seen in magazines. White tablecloths, candlelight, menus with prices I couldn't even read without gasping. He was polite, gentle, attentive, and I, a girl who had only ever dreamed of belonging, felt the fragile warmth of hope. "Are you truly all alone?" he asked, his hand covering mine. "Yes," I whispered. "No family left, no one to call." "We can fix that," he said. Those words, soft and promising, felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. 6 months later, we were married. A courthouse wedding, quiet, unassuming, far from the lavish dreams I had once imagined. Julian explained it was his mother's wish not to waste money. I didn't argue. I had a family now, or at least I thought I did. I had a home, a husband, and the hope of acceptance from the woman who had shaped his life. Beatrice Vane, his mother. But Beatrice never hid her contempt. Every word, every glance reminded me I was an outsider. A foster kid, a charity case, someone unworthy of love. Yet I endured. I cooked, I cleaned, I tried to anticipate her desires, desperate for approval. And then came the day she was diagnosed. Chronic kidney failure, dialysis, months, maybe weeks to live. It was Julian who first brought the subject to me, in the cold, echoing hospital corridor, his hands gripping mine as he knelt. "I know it's too much," he whispered, voice trembling, "but you're the only one who can save her." And something inside me stirred again. The same part that had wanted to belong, to be needed, to finally have a family. The part that still remembered my parents' laughter and the cold halls of foster homes. I nodded, barely aware of what I was agreeing to. I would soon learn that loyalty can be a weapon, love can be a trap, and the family I had dreamed of might be the very thing that betrays you. The day Julian asked me to give one of my kidneys to his mother changed everything. At first, I thought I had misheard him. A kidney? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He knelt in the hospital corridor, looking up at me with that same calm, steady gaze that had once made me feel safe. I know it's a lot to ask, he said, but you're the only one who can save her. You're a perfect match. You're the only one in the world who can do this. I froze. A perfect match? It seemed impossible. My mind raced through the years of medical exams I had endured, the faint scars on my arms from childhood vaccinations, the trauma of my past life in foster care. And yet, here I was being asked to literally give a part of myself to someone I barely knew, someone who had barely shown me kindness. But Julian's eyes held an urgency I couldn't ignore. "Why me?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "Why not you? You're her son." He pulled a medical report from his pocket, and my heart sank as I read the words, incompatibility. Julian's own body couldn't provide the organ his mother so desperately needed. "I would give her both my kidneys if I could," he said softly, almost apologetically. "But I can't. I've tried everything. This is the only way." For 3 days, he didn't give me a moment to think. He brought me coffee in bed, stroked my hair, whispered promises of love and gratitude. He reminded me constantly that this was the ultimate way to become part of the family, not just a wife, but blood and flesh. My fear and doubt wrestled with the longing in my heart. I had spent my life chasing approval, love, and belonging. Could I sacrifice a part of myself for that dream? Could I trust him? Finally, I agreed. The words felt foreign on my lips. "I'll do it." Julian's face lit up with relief and pride. He buried his face in my hair and whispered, "You'll finally be part of this family, I swear it." In my mind, I imagined Beatrix's smile, her gratitude, the warmth that had always seemed just beyond my reach. I wanted to believe in a future where I was truly loved. The day before the surgery, I signed a mountain of documents, waivers, consent forms, protocols. Each paper seemed endless, every signature a silent promise that I was ready to give a piece of myself. Julian leaned over me as I signed, pointing to a clause that mentioned the possibility of the organ being reassigned if the original recipient became medically unfit. I didn't read it properly. I just wanted it to be over. The next morning, as I was wheeled into the operating room, the bright lights above blurred into streaks of white. Julian held my hand, his lips brushing my forehead. "I'll be waiting," he said. "The moment you wake up, I'll be the first face you see. And then Bora Bora." Bora Bora? The promised paradise seemed so far away now, overshadowed by the cold, sterile reality of the hospital. The surgery was a blur of anesthesia, sterile smells, and the pounding of my own heartbeat. When I woke up, the world was different. The private suite Julian had promised was gone. The ceiling above me was gray, cracked, and uneven. 4 beds lined the room, the sound of coughing patients and the hum of televisions filling the space. Pain shot through my side, thick and relentless, and my hand brushed against a drainage tube that made me feel nauseous. Julian was nowhere to be seen. I felt abandoned, vulnerable, and more alone than I had ever been. Questions clawed at my mind. Had I made the right choice? Was this the proof of love Julian promised, or had I walked blindly into a trap? The faint pulse of fear in my chest grew stronger with every passing hour. And then on the 4th day, they arrived. Julian entered first, composed, perfectly dressed, calm as ever. Behind him, an orderly pushed Beatrix in her wheelchair, draped in cashmere. And trailing them was a woman I had never seen, tall, elegant, wearing a flowing red dress that seemed to scream confidence and power. My stomach dropped as a cold realization began to form. Something was very wrong. Julian tossed a brown envelope onto my chest. Divorce papers. My breath caught in my throat. The betrayal was immediate, crushing. All the promises, the whispered words of love, the dreams of belonging, they were lies. Every step I had taken to prove myself, every moment I had believed in our love, had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan. And now I was left with the shocking truth. My sacrifice had been used against me. In that instant, the world shifted beneath my feet. What I thought was love was manipulation. What I thought was family was a trap. and the question burned in my mind, hotter than any pain in my body. Where had my kidney really gone, and who had truly benefited from my sacrifice? The moment Julian tossed the brown envelope onto my chest, the room went silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Divorce papers. 3 days after my surgery, and I had been blindsided. The words on the page were cruelly final, a reminder that my trust had been nothing more than a tool in their hands. My chest tightened, pain from the incision stabbing through me like knives. I wanted to scream, cry, collapse, but there was a steel in me, forged from a childhood of loss and survival. I wouldn't break here. Beatrix's pale, sharp eyes were fixed on me, measuring every reaction. Her thin lips curled in a sneer, delighting in my shock. The woman in the red dress, Sienna, stood beside Julian, perfectly composed, her smile the kind that freezes the blood. My heart pounded as a bitter, icy realization washed over me. This was never about family. This was a calculated move, and I had been bait. Why? I whispered, my voice trembling. I did everything you asked. I gave a part of myself. Why? Julian's gaze was unreadable, cold, polite, almost casual. It was necessary, he said, as if discussing the weather. You were needed because you were a match, nothing more. It's just business, Amani. I couldn't comprehend it. Business. My sacrifice, my pain, the literal piece of my body that had been cut from me, it was all a transaction in their eyes. Anger, disbelief, and heartbreak collided, twisting inside me. I wanted to lash out, to scream at them, to make them feel a fraction of the torment I felt. But the tube in my side reminded me of my fragility. I was still recovering from major surgery. Then, a sharp, professional voice cut through the tension. What is going on here? A tall man in a white coat, Dr. Bennett, stepped forward, followed by 2 nurses. His eyes scanned the scene, my tear-streaked face, Julian's smug composure, Beatrix's cold triumph, and Sienna's calculated smile. Who authorized subjecting a post-operative patient to this kind of stress? He demanded. She's only 4 days out from a nephrectomy. Julian tried to regain control, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. It's a family matter. Dr. Bennett's gaze hardened, unyielding. Family matter? This is a hospital. Rules apply here. She is a patient, not a pawn in your game. The room seemed to constrict, the weight of judgment pressing down on Julian, Beatrix, and Sienna. I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps justice wasn't gone completely. Dr. Bennett continued, his voice steady, cutting through their arrogance like a scalpel. Your mother's transplant was canceled. The words struck like a hammer. Silence. Julian's face turned ashen. Beatrix's hand flew to her chest. Sienna's smile faltered. Canceled? I echoed, my voice barely audible, disbelief clawing at me. Dr. Bennett nodded, crossing his arms. Immediately before the transplant, your final blood work revealed an acute cardiac complication and an undetected infection. If the procedure had continued, she would likely have died on the table. The surgical board made the decision to abort the transplant. I blinked, trying to absorb the truth. The organ I had sacrificed for, the one I thought had been for Beatrix, had not gone to her. My anger flared, mixed with a strange sense of relief. The manipulation, though cruel, hadn't killed me, or anyone else I loved. Then, where is my kidney? I asked, voice trembling but gaining strength. Dr. Bennett turned to me, eyes softening slightly. Thanks to a clause in the consent form you signed, we had full legal authority to redirect the organ to save another life. And we did. The recipient is Harrison Sterling. My mind froze. Harrison Sterling. The name rang out like thunder in the room. The legendary billionaire philanthropist whose name carried power across Atlanta and beyond, the man who had withdrawn from public life due to illness. He was the one who now carried a part of me inside him. Julian's knees buckled. Beatrix's sneer vanished, replaced by fear. Sienna's hand flew to her mouth. The carefully constructed web of their deception began to unravel before my eyes. The recipient has requested to personally thank you, Dr. Bennett added. He wants you to see the impact of your gift firsthand. A surge of pride mixed with disbelief coursed through me. The betrayal still stung, but now there was purpose in my suffering. My act of love and sacrifice had not been wasted. It had saved a life, and not just any life, but someone who had the means and heart to do good with it. Julian's arrogance crumbled, replaced by panic and shock. Beatrice, who had looked upon me as a charity case, could only watch silently. And Sienna, the perfect red dress predator, seemed suddenly small, vulnerable, and powerless. I lay there, exhausted but victorious in a way I hadn't expected. They had tried to break me, exploit me, discard me. But fate, and a clause in a piece of paper they thought meaningless, had shifted the scales. I realized in that moment I was no longer just a pawn. I was a survivor, and my next steps would ensure they would never forget that lesson. The hospital room, once a place of betrayal and heartbreak, became the threshold to a new life. Harrison Sterling, the man whose life I had unknowingly saved, extended his hand to me, and in that moment I realized this wasn't charity. This was opportunity. It wasn't about being rescued. It was about learning to wield power, to take control of my own destiny, and to never again be at the mercy of someone like Julian Bain. Harrison's presence was commanding but calm. There was no pretense, no show of wealth or ego, just quiet authority. "You have survived," he said, his gravelly voice resonating with unshakable confidence. "But surviving isn't enough. You need to learn to thrive, to see the world clearly, to act decisively, to never be manipulated again." I nodded, every word hitting like a spark lighting a fire within me. My body still ached from the surgery. My side throbbed relentlessly, but my mind had already begun its transformation. The following week marked the start of an intense schedule. Each day began before sunrise, with physical therapy to strengthen my body after the kidney surgery. It was painful. Every step, every movement reminded me of my vulnerability, but it also reminded me that pain was temporary and survival was permanent. By 7 a.m., we moved into breakfast sessions where Harrison dissected the morning news with me, explaining the implications of market trends, corporate decisions, and global investments. At first, the discussions were dense and overwhelming. I had a foundation in accounting, yes, but the concepts Harrison discussed, mergers, acquisitions, leveraged assets, were worlds away from anything I had studied. But he didn't allow excuses. "Knowledge is power," he reminded me. "Without it, you will always be prey." From 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., I attended private lessons in corporate law, negotiations, public speaking, and strategic management. Harrison personally curated every session. Each lesson was designed to mold me into a woman who could command a room, interpret financial statements like an expert, and spot lies before they were spoken. At times, exhaustion overtook me. I cried quietly at night, body racked with fatigue and scars still tender, wondering if I could keep up. But each tear was a reminder. I had endured worse and survived. This time I was building, not merely surviving. Afternoons were reserved for practical exposure. I sat in on high-level meetings at Sterling Development Group, observing negotiations that would decide millions of dollars, listening to advisors, lawyers, and clients debate over contracts and investments. Initially, I was invisible, a silent observer absorbing every gesture, every word. But soon, Harrison allowed me to ask questions, give insights, challenge assumptions. The thrill of understanding complex systems, of speaking knowledgeably, was intoxicating. The fear and submissiveness Julian had tried to instill in me dissolved with each passing day. Harrison also taught me the importance of image. My wardrobe transformed from loose, shapeless clothing to tailored suits that commanded respect. My hair, once a functional bob, was styled sharply, projecting confidence. Every detail of my appearance was deliberate, signaling to the world that I was no longer a passive participant. But the true transformation was in my eyes. The foster kid's uncertainty and desperation had been replaced by sharpness, calculation, and unwavering self-respect. Most evenings, I returned to my executive suite, reviewing lessons, practicing public speaking in front of mirrors, and analyzing case studies Harrison provided. Slowly, I internalized his philosophy. Power is not given. It is taken, cultivated, and protected. Julian and Beatrice had assumed I was naive, powerless, and disposable. I now understood that the real leverage lay not in what they thought of me, but in what I was becoming. 3 weeks into the program, Harrison sat across from me in his study, a folder of documents spread across the desk. "You are ready," he said simply. I looked at him, unsure what he meant. He smiled, his piercing gaze assessing every fiber of my being. "The next step is applying your knowledge, not in theory. In reality, Julian Bain believes he still has control. Beatrice and Sienna believe they have won. Soon, they will learn how dangerous it is to underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain." The thought sent a shiver of exhilaration through me. The betrayal that had broken me was now fueling my rise. No longer would I be the pawn, the exploited, or the invisible wife. I was becoming someone who could fight back, strategically, intelligently, ruthlessly if necessary. The quiet moments when I trained, studied, and observed were molding me into a woman Julian and his family could never manipulate again. Every decision, every lesson, every ounce of effort was a step toward reclaiming my dignity and rewriting my life story. By the end of those first intense weeks, I no longer feared Julian, Beatrice, or Sienna. The fear had been replaced with clarity and purpose. I understood my value, my capabilities, and the devastating consequences of underestimating me. Harrison's mentorship had turned my heartbreak into a weapon, my vulnerability into a strategy. I was no longer just Amani Collier, the betrayed wife. I was Amani Sterling, a force to be reckoned with. And soon, the world, including Julian and his family, would witness the full extent of that transformation. By the time I had completed my initial training with Harrison Sterling, the transformation was no longer just internal, it radiated outward. My posture, my speech, the way I held a room, all of it reflected someone in control. I had studied the markets, law, corporate strategy, and human behavior. I understood leverage, influence, and the subtle power that money, information, and timing could wield. But most importantly, I understood Julian Bain and his weaknesses. He had underestimated me from the very beginning, assuming my loyalty and naivety would never waver. He was about to discover the opposite. Harrison's guidance was precise. "The key to victory," he said, "is patience. You cannot rush them. They must believe they are in control, while in reality you have orchestrated every move." He handed me a dossier containing detailed financials, bank statements, and personal files on Julian, Sienna, and even Beatrice. Every flaw, every secret, every miscalculation was documented. The more I studied, the more I realized just how vulnerable they truly were. The arrogance that had driven Julian to manipulate me, to demand my kidney, was exactly the arrogance that would be his downfall. I started by observing quietly, letting the world see me as recovered but still fragile, a woman who had endured betrayal but remained submissive. Julian, naturally, assumed I was still dependent and intimidated by his wealth. Sienna, ever confident in her new position, never suspected that the woman she had mocked and scorned was studying every move she made. Beatrice, with her brittle health and sharp tongue, believed she had eliminated all threats. Every single one of them was blind to the storm quietly forming under my calm exterior. The first step of the plan involved gaining legal and financial leverage. Harrison introduced me to Thomas Reed, Sterling's head of legal operations, who had been meticulously tracking Julian's assets. Over weeks, we confirmed that several properties and business stakes had been registered in my name during our marriage, cleverly hidden under Julian's assumption that I was too weak or naive to claim them. "He thought he controlled everything," Thomas said with a grin. "He didn't realize that even without a fight, you hold the keys to his empire." That realization was intoxicating. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a sense of justice, not through vengeance alone, but through strategy. Next, we moved to gather evidence of Julian and Sienna's deceit. From bank transfers to security footage, emails, and travel logs, every lie they had woven to manipulate people, including me, was documented. Sienna's affair with a local club owner named Trey was particularly damning. Her pregnancy timeline didn't add up. The meticulous records showed conception occurred while Julian was traveling out of state, meaning the child wasn't his. Every file I compiled was another piece of armor, another shield for the inevitable confrontation. Each revelation, once revealed, would strip them of the control they thought they held. While I organized the information, Harrison encouraged me to practice the art of patience. "Let them think they are winning," he said. "Every move they make will reveal their arrogance. Every moment of carelessness, every lie, every overconfidence, they are handing you the tools for your victory." I spent nights analyzing their patterns, predicting their next steps, and anticipating their responses. The contrast between their recklessness and my preparation was staggering. I no longer feared them. I feared wasting the advantage I had earned. At the same time, I polished my public persona. Appearances mattered. I needed to be seen as both approachable and commanding. Each tailored suit, each strategic public appearance, every conversation I had in the business circles Harrison introduced me to, built credibility. By the time Julian would next cross paths with me, he would not see a fragile, betrayed wife. He would see a woman who commanded respect, intelligence, and influence. Sienna would see the ghost of her mockery returning as an unstoppable force. Beatrice would see that the fragile girl she had manipulated had evolved into a formidable woman who could not be toyed with. Finally, the psychological aspect of the plan became clear. Julian had to believe he was in control until the moment of his downfall. I couldn't rush the confrontation. It had to feel inevitable to him, yet it had to be my design. Every move, every contract, every investment, every seemingly innocuous interaction was calculated to lull them into a false sense of security. Their overconfidence, greed, and vanity were weapons I intended to use. By the time the truth hit, it would not just be a shock. It would be a total collapse of everything they thought they controlled. Standing in my new office, overlooking the Atlanta skyline, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The pain of betrayal, the loss of trust, the manipulation, it had all led me here. I was no longer powerless. I was ready to move from preparation to execution. Julian Bain, Sienna, and Beatrice believed the story was over. They thought the betrayed wife would quietly recover and fade into obscurity. They were wrong. The game was about to begin, and I was holding all the cards. The moment had finally arrived. After weeks of careful preparation, every detail mapped out, every file verified, I was ready to put my plan into motion. Julian still believed he was untouchable, his arrogance and overconfidence blinding him to the storm I was quietly orchestrating. Sienna was basking in the illusion of power, certain she had replaced me in every way, and Beatrice, as always, was convinced her control was absolute. None of them knew the true extent of what I had learned, nor the precision with which I would strike. The first move was subtle but devastating. Julian had been preparing to host a lavish business dinner with prospective investors for Vane Textiles, flaunting his wealth and influence. With Harrison's guidance and Thomas Reed's meticulous evidence, I orchestrated a situation where every claim he had made would be scrutinized, and every falsehood exposed. Anonymous tips and documents were sent to the auditors, who arrived unannounced during the dinner. Julian's polished facade faltered immediately. Contracts that supposedly represented profitable deals were revealed as forgeries. Vendors he claimed existed didn't. Revenue figures he boasted about were inflated beyond reason. The room of investors, once full of polite smiles and nods, turned to confusion, suspicion, and finally, outrage. Sienna's face went pale. She had relied on Julian's charisma and the illusion of their combined power to maintain her position. Every carefully constructed lie unraveled in real time, exposing her schemes and her affair with Trey. Whispers circulated through the room as the evidence of her pregnancy timeline surfaced, confirming she had used Julian as a pawn in her own plans. Beatrice, observing from the sidelines, was caught off guard. Her sharp tongue and contemptuous sneers faded into disbelief. For the first time, she saw cracks in the empire she had thought untouchable. Meanwhile, I remained composed, the calm center amidst the chaos. I wasn't the woman who had signed over her body, naive and trusting. I was the architect of their downfall, the one who had anticipated every move and every countermeasure. As the investors began to demand explanations, I stepped forward, my voice steady and commanding. "Gentlemen," I said, allowing my presence to fill the room, "these discrepancies are not just mistakes. They are evidence of deliberate mismanagement and deceit. I believe transparency is essential for any future investment decisions." Each word was measured, authoritative, and unassailable. Julian's attempts to interject were ignored, his usual charm rendered meaningless in the face of fact and preparation. The psychological impact was immediate. Julian's confidence crumbled as investors questioned him directly, referencing documents he had believed under his control. Sienna's attempts to intercede were futile. Her reputation as a manipulator was now public knowledge among the very people she had intended to impress. Beatrice, watching her son falter and her supposed control slip away, clenched her hands in frustration, powerless to intervene. The room, once filled with admiration for Julian's supposed prowess, was now a courtroom of silent judgment, every eye assessing his integrity and capability. Outside the room, Harrison and Thomas monitored every move, providing real-time updates and advice. They had positioned me perfectly. Every action Julian or Sienna took was anticipated, every argument countered, every claim disproven. I was no longer the vulnerable wife. They had built their plans around a fantasy of my compliance, but the orchestrator of the unraveling. My heart raced not from fear, but from the intoxicating clarity of control. Every betrayal they had inflicted upon me, every lie they had spun, was being exposed with precision. By the end of the evening, the outcome was undeniable. Investors withdrew their interest, Julian's credibility was in ruins, and Sienna's plans to consolidate her position within the family were shattered. Beatrice, who had once dictated every interaction, now realized that her power was contingent on Julian's success, and that success had evaporated in a single, carefully orchestrated night. The first strike had been devastatingly effective, setting the stage for the final moves of my plan. As I walked out of the building later that night, the Atlanta skyline stretched before me, glimmering with promise and possibility. I allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. Julian, Sienna, and Beatrice had learned, too late, that underestimating me was a fatal mistake. I had reclaimed my power, my agency, and now the game was mine to finish. The next steps would be even more decisive, ensuring that their betrayal would cost them everything they had manipulated and hoarded, while I rose stronger than ever before. The night after the disastrous investor dinner, Julian retreated to his mansion, his face a mask of disbelief and simmering rage. He hadn't expected the walls of his carefully constructed empire to collapse so quickly, nor had he anticipated that someone he dismissed as weak and naive could orchestrate such precise retribution. Sienna, too, was in shock. The carefully woven web of deceit she relied on had unraveled in front of her, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Meanwhile, I wasn't celebrating. I was planning the next phase. The first strike had weakened them, but it was far from over. Harrison Sterling's guidance had been invaluable. Every move I made was calculated, every step executed with precision. Thomas Reed had compiled files that traced Julian's and Sienna's deceit back months, proving not only financial mismanagement, but a deliberate pattern of manipulation and betrayal. The evidence against them was irrefutable, and my only job now was to ensure it reached the right hands at the right time. I started by targeting Sienna. The young woman had flaunted her pregnancy as a shield, believing it gave her leverage. But with the timeline and medical evidence in hand, I exposed the truth. The child was not Julian's, a fact corroborated by hospital records and genetic tests. I sent the information to key stakeholders in Julian's business and discreetly leaked it to journalists who specialized in high-profile society scandals. The ripple effect was immediate. Investors, employees, and family friends began questioning the integrity of the couple, whispering about their reckless decisions and questionable alliances. Sienna's public image crumbled, leaving her isolated and desperate. Next, I turned my attention to Julian. With the evidence Thomas Reed had meticulously compiled, I filed legal actions that would prevent him from accessing assets registered in my name, while also alerting authorities to his ongoing financial fraud. Julian had believed he could manipulate the courts and continue his charade, but now every lie he had ever told was documented and ready to be presented. The leverage he once held over me was gone, replaced by a network of legal and financial safeguards designed to ensure he could never harm me, or anyone else, again. Beatrice, observing from the shadows, realized that her control was crumbling faster than she could react. Her carefully crafted persona of superiority and cunning was being dismantled piece by piece. She had always underestimated me, believing my foster care background and lack of connections made me weak. Now she could see the cost of that misjudgment. The woman she had dismissed as insignificant was systematically exposing her family's flaws, removing their power, and taking control of their narrative. As the weeks progressed, the pressure mounted. Julian tried to rally allies, but his credibility had been shattered. Sienna attempted to maintain a public appearance of composure, but the cracks in her facade were visible to anyone paying attention. I, however, remained composed. My days were filled with meetings with Harrison, Thomas, and carefully vetted consultants who helped me execute the final phases of the plan. Every action I took was strategic. Public exposure, legal pressure, and subtle manipulation of business networks combined to tighten the noose around their ambitions. The psychological warfare was perhaps the most satisfying. Julian and Sienna were constantly second-guessing themselves, paranoid that the next revelation would ruin them further. Beatrice, once so domineering, was reduced to silent fury, her contempt replaced by anxiety. Each step they took to regain control only strengthened my position. The lessons I had learned during my intense training with Harrison, financial literacy, corporate strategy, negotiation, had transformed me from a victim into a master strategist. I wasn't acting out of revenge alone. I was reclaiming my dignity, proving that strength comes from knowledge, preparation, and unshakable composure. One evening, as I reviewed the latest batch of evidence with Thomas, Harrison entered the room with a quiet confidence. "You've done exceptionally well," he said, studying me carefully. "But the final phase requires patience and precision. Julian and Sienna must believe they have a chance to regain control. Only then will the final revelation hit them with maximum impact." I nodded, understanding the stakes. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about ensuring they paid for every moment of manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty they had inflicted. As I prepared for the culmination of the plan, I felt a sense of calm resolve. I had transformed my anger, betrayal, and fear into strategy. Every document, every action, every carefully timed move was a step toward justice. Julian and Sienna thought they controlled the narrative, but the reality was far different. I had learned the hard way that power isn't given, it's earned, and now I was wielding it with precision, intelligence, and unwavering determination. The web had tightened around them. The game was almost over, but the final moves, the ultimate revelations and consequences, were yet to come. When those moments arrived, Julian, Sienna, and Beatrice would finally understand the cost of underestimating the woman they once sought to destroy. And when they did, there would be no escape. The day had arrived. The gala invitation had been carefully orchestrated by me, a seemingly benign networking event for Julian's textile business. But in reality, it was the stage for the ultimate reckoning. Julian and Sienna arrived early, dressed to impress, expecting accolades, unaware that every detail had been planned to reveal their deceit. Beatrix, too, hovered near the shadows, hopping to salvage some semblance of her pride, but the undercurrent of tension in the room betrayed their anxiety. They had no idea the trap was set, and it was about to snap. I arrived last, the embodiment of poise and power. The emerald green silk gown I wore clung gracefully, reflecting the light in ways that drew attention without demanding it. Diamonds sparkled at my throat and wrists, gifts from Harrison Sterling to mark the completion of my transformation and preparation. Every step I took was deliberate, every glance calculated. The air shifted as I entered. Conversations paused briefly, eyes followed, and a quiet murmur ran through the room. They could sense it. This was no ordinary guest. Harrison Sterling, standing beside me, introduced me with precision, ensuring every word carried weight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it is my honor to present the new CEO of Phoenix Investments, Amani Sterling. She will be leading our upcoming ventures, and we are privileged to have her insights guiding our investments." A hush fell over the crowd. Julian's eyes widened in disbelief, Sienna's jaw dropped, and Beatrix's face drained of color. The power dynamic had shifted completely in an instant. I smiled politely, masking the satisfaction that surged beneath the surface. I greeted key investors, exchanged pleasantries, and subtly referenced discussions about potential collaborations, every action demonstrating confidence, authority, and mastery over the corporate world they had tried to use against me. Julian attempted to interject, to reclaim some shred of control, but the audience no longer deferred to him. Questions were directed at me, approvals sought from me, validation needed from me. Each ignored attempt of his chipped away at his credibility in front of those who mattered. Then came the first public revelation. With the investors' attention secured, I orchestrated the display of the documents Thomas Reed had compiled. Julian's falsified financial reports, Sienna's secret dealings, and the evidence of the fraudulent pregnancy timeline. The room gasped collectively as the proof of deceit was revealed, every lie laid bare for all to see. Julian's hands trembled, his confidence shattered. Sienna tried to speak, but her words faltered, and Beatrix's stern mask cracked into a grimace of impotent fury. The consequences of their arrogance, manipulation, and cruelty were no longer private. They were on full display. Next, I addressed Julian directly, my voice calm, icy, and unwavering. "You believed you could manipulate everyone, deceive me, and walk away unscathed. Yet here you are, stripped of credibility, assets, and trust. Your empire is now under scrutiny, and every move you make will be monitored. The investments you thought would save you are legally bound to fail if you do not comply with federal oversight." Julian opened his mouth to argue, but the authority in the room silenced him. I turned to Sienna, my gaze sharp, precise. "And you, who thought your lies would secure wealth and influence, are exposed for what you are, a woman relying on manipulation, betrayal, and deception. The child you claimed was Julian. That lie is now a matter of public record." Her face fell, realization washing over her as the crowd shifted their attention to her with a mixture of shock and judgment. The final blow came as Harrison Sterling stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. "Thanks to Amani's courage and intelligence, Phoenix Investments has secured a leadership we trust. Julian and Sienna, your actions have consequences. The law will determine the rest." Federal agents discreetly positioned at the edges of the gala observed quietly, their presence a silent but unmistakable signal. Julian's panic was visible. Sienna clutched at his sleeve, desperate but powerless. Beatrix's attempts to salvage dignity were futile. The world saw through their facade. As the night ended, I remained composed, calm, and dignified, a stark contrast to the chaos I had orchestrated for them. Julian, Sienna, and Beatrix left humiliated, stripped of the illusion of control they once wielded. Every investor, guest, and onlooker understood the transformation of the woman they had underestimated. I had not only reclaimed my life and dignity, but also secured power, influence, and justice. Walking away from the gala, I felt an unshakable sense of closure. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, all of it had been countered with strategy, intelligence, and unwavering determination. Julian's empire was now crumbling, Sienna's influence obliterated, and Beatrix forced to reckon with the consequences of her arrogance. I had not just survived, I had flourished, transforming every obstacle into a stepping stone toward power and independence. As I left the building with Harrison Sterling beside me, I realized something profound. True strength is not in revenge alone, but in turning adversity into opportunity, betrayal into strategy, and fear into confidence. Julian and his accomplices had underestimated me, but I had shown them the cost of underestimating a woman determined to reclaim her life. The story was far from over, but for the first time, I knew the ending would be mine to write. The days following the gala were quiet, but every moment carried the weight of victory. Julian and Sienna were now in the hands of the law. Federal investigations, bankruptcy filings, and criminal charges ensured they could never harm me again. Beatrix, stripped of control over her family's wealth and influence, retreated into bitter solitude. The power that had once oppressed me had been dismantled, and I no longer feared their presence or their judgment. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. The scar on my side had healed, now a pale reminder of the ordeal I had endured. It no longer symbolized naivety or weakness. It was a badge of survival, a testament to the strength I had cultivated through pain, sacrifice, and relentless determination. Every morning I looked in the mirror, I saw not the timid foster child who had once yearned for acceptance, but a woman capable of shaping her destiny on her own terms. Harrison Sterling remained by my side, not as a protector, but as a mentor and partner in ambition. Together, we solidified Phoenix Investments, turning it into a powerhouse of ethical finance, innovative projects, and strategic philanthropy. Every decision I made carried the lessons of my past: vigilance, intelligence, and integrity. The same analytical skills I had honed under his guidance now allowed me to anticipate challenges, outmaneuver competitors, and create opportunities where none seemed to exist. I also focused on helping others. My journey from foster care to power had taught me the importance of opportunity and support. I established programs for children aging out of foster systems, scholarships for young women in need, and legal aid for those trapped in unjust situations. Every success I achieved was shared, every lesson passed on. I transformed my pain into purpose, proving that resilience and courage could create ripples far beyond one life. One afternoon, I visited the hospital where it had all begun, the place where Julian had demanded my kidney, where betrayal had been laid bare, and where I had discovered my own strength. The nurses and doctors remembered me, their faces lighting up with warmth and recognition. Dr. Bennett, still overseeing patient care with the same sharp professionalism, approached with a smile. "You've done incredible work, Amani," he said. "The lives you've impacted and the change you've brought, it's extraordinary." I thanked him, realizing that the gift of my kidney, once a source of pain and manipulation, had become a symbol of hope, not only for Harrison Sterling, but for countless others whose lives would be improved because of that choice. Life continued to unfold with a sense of rhythm and purpose. I attended board meetings, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, and mentored rising leaders. Yet I also allowed myself moments of personal joy. Quiet mornings watching the sunrise over Georgia hills, evenings filled with laughter and music, and occasional travels to places I had once only dreamed of seeing. The woman who had once trembled at the thought of rejection now walked with confidence, grace, and authority, shaping her world as she pleased. Occasionally, news of Julian and Sienna reached me. Julian, now facing years of potential imprisonment, had become a cautionary tale in the business community. Sienna's schemes were exposed, and she faded into obscurity, her ambitions thwarted. Beatrix, isolated and powerless, spent her days confronting the consequences of her arrogance. None of them could touch the life I had rebuilt, None could erase the strength I had forged in the fires of betrayal. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the journey, on loss, betrayal, and the decisions that had defined me. I thought of my parents whose lives were cut short and felt gratitude for the lessons their absence had forced me to learn. Resilience, self-reliance, and the courage to demand more from life. I thought of the foster homes, the indifferent staff, and the countless challenges I had faced, realizing that every obstacle had prepared me for this life of influence, justice, and empowerment. Standing on the rooftop terrace of Phoenix Investments, overlooking the skyline that stretched like a sea of possibility, I felt a profound sense of closure. The woman who had once given her kidney under duress, betrayed by the man she loved, had emerged not only unbroken but stronger, wiser, and more formidable than anyone could have anticipated. The world no longer dictated the terms of my life. I did. And as the sun set, painting the sky with golden hues, I smiled, knowing that my story was no longer defined by pain or betrayal, but by triumph, courage, and the unwavering belief in my own worth. I had walked through darkness, faced deceit, and emerged victorious. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. The future was mine, and I was ready.